Okay, so welcome back, mi gente. Ladies, how are we doing? Today, we're going to deep dive into a very special topic that's essential for thriving in relationships and personal growth, and that's boundaries and communication and
Mhm.
relationships and all that good stuff.
Hot topic.
So, I know, I love this topic. To get us started, tell me what are some healthy boundaries that you look at in your relationships, whether that's with your family, friendships, or your partners?
I feel like there are so many different kinds of boundaries,
Yeah.
right? And I feel like when I think about boundaries, I think about like internal and external boundaries. So I think external boundaries is talked about a lot more, like the boundaries that we're setting with other people, right? But we also have internal boundaries, like the boundaries that we set with ourselves, right? And so I think that when we think about setting external boundaries, we have to be able to set those internal boundaries first and then follow through with actually vocalizing the boundary or communicating the boundary, right? And I think, well, so I have so many thoughts on this, right? So there's like the different kinds of boundaries, and then there's internal boundaries, and then there's external boundaries, and then it's like what actually even is a boundary, right? And
Mhm.
so I think first we need to clarify like what is a boundary? A boundary is not an expectation that you set with other people. A boundary is something that really helps you be in relationship with other people, right? Because if you didn't want to be in relationship with other people, then we can just like have a wall up, we can ghost them, we can like, I don't know, not even say anything, and then a relationship doesn't strengthen when you do that, right? Boundaries are there to strengthen a relationship and to help you continue to be in a relationship with someone. So that's my first thought on like what even is a boundary. But then we can like talk about like the different kinds of boundaries. Like we have like our time boundaries, right? Like are people respecting your time? We have our emotional boundaries, physical boundaries, sexual boundaries, financial boundaries, right? Like we can talk about like the different kinds.
Yeah. No, but that's such a good one that and I think even understanding before we set a boundary, like this is why it's so important to know ourselves.
Mhm.
What are your current values right now? And what type of aligned community, whether it's your family, your friends, your coworkers, whoever you might be around with, understand what type of community you want around you. And again, that's why it's so important to go inward before we set the boundary because it's so easy to just say, I don't want to be near this person and I'm going to just tell them not to be around me because they make me feel uncomfortable. I want you to go ahead and explore that beforehand as well. Like go inward. Ask yourself like what are my current values? If for example, I'm in a relationship and I decide that hey, I kind of don't want to have um sexual intercourse beforehand and I want to make sure that every guy that I talk to respects that, right? And when we set those clear boundaries for ourselves because you know your why, maybe it's because you're waiting until you're married to go into that type of stuff, or maybe it's because you're like, man, I want to just know if this person really likes me for who I am before I go into that. Or maybe I've had history of, just, sleeping with whoever and it's not been intentional. And I want to be intentional this time. I want to make sure that when I'm giving my body, I'm giving it to someone who respects me and that will adore me moving forward. And so when we go with that and understand our why and why we're setting it, it makes it easier when a guy comes up to me and says, hey, I really like you, Iris, but I also want to sleep with you, right? I have a clear direction on where I go and say, no, this is my boundary. I do not want to cross that. Are you in alignment with that? And if that person says no, it's easier for me to also make a decision and say, well, thank you so much. We're not aligned. I'm going to let you go your way and I go my way. It just makes it so much easier for you as a person to navigate it because boundaries are also in a way the way I look at it is it's like a compass. It lets me know in which directions I need to go. And same with family, right? If I have a family member that needs to learn how to take more accountability because maybe that's a value of mine where I'm like I cherish accountability. If I was out of line, I would want someone else to call me out in a loving place to say, "Hey, you need to step up your game." Right? And if I'm around family members that don't do that, in order to protect my peace and in order to respect what it is that I value the most, it's okay for me to also love people from a distance and say, because you are making these type of decisions and because it's not helping me in the direction that I want to go, I can't support you on this journey. It just makes it a lot more easier for us. And again, I know it's not easy, but I do invite our listeners to just take the time to understand like, who are you at your core? What are your values? And why you stand for that.
I love everything you guys have both said. Um, and I don't know why, and I'm a big analogy girl, but when you guys were both talking immediately, have y'all been bowling before?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you maybe recall the first time you went bowling?
Oh yeah, I sucked. I
No.
needed the little things.
Did
Oh,
you
the bumpers,
know?
the bumpers, the
Did you
bumpers.
know? Okay, did you know they had bumpers?
I did not. My dad is the one who actually went and asked for the bumpers because he knew that
So,
I needed that direction to get me straight to the bowling pins.
so this whole time you guys are talking, I'm thinking about like the first time I went bowling and I didn't know that there was bumpers. And someone went and put the bumpers up and I was like, "What? There's bumpers?" Like now I don't have to overwork in like trying to get the pins to go down because now I'm being guided about these bumpers.
Uh,
By the way, bumpers meaning boundaries in this scenario.
I love
And
that.
but it comes and I thought of that because I also like Edie's just you made a great point. Like we have to get to know ourselves first. So I had to realize that I couldn't do it on my own and that I needed these bumpers. I needed these boundaries set in order for me to keep going straight and get better at bowling, right? But half of us didn't even know the bumpers were there. Half of us don't even know where to start with our boundaries. But that comes from like starting with who we are and like what's important to us, what brings us joy, what brings us happiness, what brings us peace. Because more than anything, peace is so important to our nervous system. And if that's not controlled, so many things can go messed up and like interfere with our systems, right? So it all stems from like who we are, what's important to us, and defining that will definitely bring those bumpers up. And this is going to be used straight ahead to what's important, which is pushing those pins down.
I
I love that
love
you shared that
that.
analogy. And
Yeah,
also remember
that's so
that your
good.
boundaries are there to protect you at the end of the day.
Hmm.
Right.
Your boundaries are not the enemy. It is literally a way to protect in the direction that you need to go. It's like the parameters that sometimes we have to set for ourselves. And I know it's so easy and so tempting sometimes to want to go outside of it because maybe the people that are around you don't support that, right? I think about like drinking and peer pressuring and how some people
Mm-hmm.
don't like to drink, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you're around people who don't even know their own boundaries, they want you to engage. Sometimes it's, not in a malicious intention, like they just want to have fun. They don't know any better. But again, like when you know who you are, you can protect yourself from the consequences that can also come from it when you do cross your own boundaries, right? Like if I'm taking multiple shots and then I'm over here, you know, unfortunately driving, I can get a DUI or I can sleep with the wrong person. And if I don't take aware of like the next steps that need to be taken care of, right? Those also result in I slept with someone and I also got pregnant. And I don't want that for myself, right? So your boundaries are there to protect you. Because the moment that you know your capacity, oh, and that's another one, capacity, your boundaries also show you what your capacity is. How far do I want to go? What's within my own limits that I also want to respect for myself? That is so important.
Right.
Because when you know your own capacity, you know who you are, you know your core values, you are protecting yourself and staying in that lane, like Lupe said, and you're staying focused on whatever it is that you need to prioritize in that moment.
Right. It goes back to like those internal boundaries, right? Like though when we know ourselves, right? Like the both of you were saying, like when we know ourselves, we can know what we feel comfortable with and what we don't feel comfortable with, what we want to tolerate, what we don't want to tolerate, right? But those are internal boundaries, right? So, how do we actually set external boundaries? Because just because you say, all right, I'm not drinking today. That's a boundary that you've set with yourself, but you haven't set it with other people. You don't set it with other people until you actually communicate it, right? And say it out loud. And people can't read your mind, right? I know that. I think that's another thing. I feel like so often when we know what our boundaries are, we
Mhm.
want people to read our minds, but nobody is a mind reader. No matter how long somebody has known you, they cannot read your mind and they don't know what you want until you tell them. So, right.
Yeah,
Now that we know how to set those internal boundaries, now that we know, okay, we have to get to know ourselves, we know we have to get to know like what we feel comfortable with. How do we actually say, no, I am not drinking tonight? I'd really like you to respect that boundary, right? And I think it's also important that once we communicate the boundary, how will we follow through with the boundary if someone crosses the boundary, right? Because I think that
Mm.
what we forget is that it's expected for somebody who needs boundaries to cross a boundary, right? That's why they need a boundary in the first place, right? Because they haven't been respecting them in the first place. So it's remembering that, okay, if you say, no, I don't want to drink, most likely someone who has a history of crossing boundaries is going to say, no, but come on, drink another, try just this one time, or whatever it is. We're using the
Yeah.
drinking example, but it could be applied to anything, right? So how will you follow through with your boundary? So if you continue to peer pressure me, if you continue to pressure me, if you continue to ask me, if you continue to say this thing that I don't want you to say, or if you continue to do this behavior, right? What will you do next? Right? So I think a lot of the time when we think about external boundaries, we think the other person is supposed to do something, but it's not the other person. It's how you are going to respond when somebody disrespects the boundary that you've set. I hope that
that's
makes
such,
sense.
no, it
Mhm.
does. That's such a great example, Tati, because I'm thinking about back when I started my healing journey and I needed to communicate with people. And I'm going to use the example of drinking because that was a phase in my life where I would drink. It was fun for a period of time until I realized that, I internally needed to shift that to better myself. And people have these expectations of how you're going to be because of what you've been in the past. And so I remember going to a party and letting my friends know straightforward, like, hey, I will not be drinking. My limit is 2 drinks, but no more hard alcohol for me. And I want you guys to also have a lot of patience in the process of this because just because you communicate it once does not mean that they're going to understand the first time because they're going to test the boundary. They want to see like how far you'll go. Is she being for real? And that's where you have to also beforehand give yourself this pep talk of I'm keeping myself accountable. Because at the end of the day, you know your why, you know your reasonings as to why you're changing. And so when you're going to communicate this, again, it's not the responsibility of the other people. It's your chance to be accountable for yourself. And I remember letting my friends know. And of course, they came with more drinks and they were like, it's okay. We're going to have a good time. You're in a good space, like we got you. And
Yeah.
again, not because they're coming from bad intentions, they just want to test it. But this is where my responsibility comes in and setting the boundary again and saying, I'm no longer drinking, right? And if it's getting pushed more and more, this is where you get to test the capacity, like we were talking about earlier. How far are you willing to go? And what are your initial reactions during that time? Do you cave in? Do you get frustrated as you're communicating it more? Are the people around you even ready to receive it? Because, for example,
Mhm.
like my friends, when they were pushing on those extra drinks, they were already feeling some type of way. Like they were, in a different level, a different state. So their capacity was not there. They just wanted to have a good time. So I have to be in a discernment mode where I have to either gently push back and say, look, thanks so much for inviting me to the party, but this is my time to retreat. And when
Mhm.
they're in a different place, right? And let's say we go out again, or if we're in someone's house and they're trying to do the same thing, I have to constantly remind these people. But if reminding people becomes exhausting to me and people are not respecting it, no matter how many times I've said it, this is where you gently retreat and say, okay, I can't go to these parties right now. I have to model my own lifestyle of what I want to do. And that's what I had to do. Like, At a certain point, I'm like, I had to tell my friends gently to be like, I don't feel like you're hearing me. I've been telling you this multiple times, and this is becoming frustrating now. So moving forward, don't invite me to the parties. I'm not
Mhm.
ready to go to the parties yet. Unless you guys are okay with knowing that I'm not going to drink like this, then I'm okay with coming.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And
That-
for some of your friends, they will awaken. For some of your friends, they don't understand. And that's okay because that's their own journey. It's not their responsibility to jump on board with you every single time you want to change your life. And so, gratefully, I had really amazing friends who were like, I value our quality time more than drinking. So I'm not going to push for that. Oh, your capacity is 2 drinks? Okay, we'll only drink two. And we're going to be wise on how we do that because obviously I
Hmm.
want you to enjoy and have a good time with me. And that makes a difference. But it's
Mhm.
okay to gently retreat because I had to do
Mhm.
that. And does it suck? Because obviously, like, I get FOMO. Why am I going to lie? We all get FOMO here to some extent. And we want to be a part of those things. But at the same time, if it's going to jeopardize the quality of life that you're trying to decide for yourself, and if you yourself cannot be accountable for the type of lifestyle that you want, we can't place that responsibility on anybody else.
Mhm.
So, this is a time when we're exploring boundaries to understand again, like who you are, what your capacity is, but also, ladies, this is a time where you get to also be accountable for yourself and your
Hmm.
healing. And allow yourself to also practice that because it's going to take time. I'm not going to say that setting a boundary that people are going to get it right away.
No.
Mhm.
They're not. They're not going to get that, right? Or for example, like I can think about another time where with my own family, I had to set personal boundaries financially where I'm like I can't
Mhm.
support in the ways that I used to before. And it was hard for them because my family was like, woo, our sugar mama's here and she's going to help
Mhm.
us and feed us and do all the things. Woo, because that was who Edie's was for such a long time. And when we try to rewrite our story, our narrative, it's really hard for people to understand that you're changing because they're so
Mhm.
used to you seeing you in that way. But when you're also setting those boundaries, right, it's new to them.
Yeah.
So have a lot of patience in the process because although you're healing and you see different things in different lenses, they're not there yet because they've seen you in such a different way for such a long time. So give it time, but again, stand firm
Mhm.
in a loving way also, where you are being consistent with your boundary. So people can understand like, oh, she means it. She's for real. Like
And I get,
she's not playing. And I think that's where people will slowly get the message. But for you, most importantly, it's reminding yourself that you got your back. I
yeah.
think that's the important part of a boundary is like the more we stay consistent, I think about like little girls who give pinky promises to themselves. That's what we have to do it for ourselves too. Like, hey, I'm gonna pinky
Mhm.
promise that we got to set this financial boundary because, yo, girl, like we can't be going through our savings or we can't be purchasing things and putting ourselves in credit card debt or we can't do, these things because we have goals for ourselves where we're trying to save more money for a house or save more money for a wedding or save more money for whatever it is that you want. And those boundaries are also meant to take care of you. So allow the boundary to take care of you. But in order for it to
Mhm.
take care of you, you need to stay accountable and you got to keep that promise to yourself.
Mhm.
And I think it gets easier over time. I feel like,
Mhm.
especially if you are someone who has never set boundaries, it's
Yeah.
like you were saying, it's going to take time. You have to stay
Mhm.
consistent. The more that you set those boundaries, the easier it gets over time. Something that I think can be really helpful if you are someone who has never set boundaries and all of a sudden you're like, okay, now I'm ready to start setting boundaries. Something that can be helpful is just to vocalize that to your friends and your families and your family members, right? Like, hey, I know that in the past I wasn't really vocal about like what I needed or what I wanted, but moving forward, I just want you to know that I'm practicing setting more boundaries and being more intentional with speaking up about what I want. So just kind of like being transparent about
Yes.
that piece because I feel like sometimes it can kind of be like a little shock to other people of like, oh, now you're acting different, right? But if you can just be transparent and vocalize, like, hey, you know what? Moving forward, I'm going to be trying to set a little bit more boundaries. So you'll probably see that I'm going to be a little bit more vocal about my needs and my wants. So just so that you know that you're aware, this is what's going to be happening.
That's such a good one too, Tati. And even just thinking about my journey when I started setting boundaries, because it was so hard for me, like being the eldest daughter, it was so hard. I did not know how to set boundaries. I was such a big people pleaser. But what really helped me also was going to therapy and having a
Mm,
coach
Mhm.
where I was able to practice in the room with them to say, like, okay, pretend I'm your mom
Role
and how are you going to
playing.
set a boundary with me, right? Or pretend I'm your sisters, pretend I'm your brother, pretend I'm your partner, right? And practice that out loud. And sometimes too, like what also helped me was being in front of a mirror before seeing anybody that I had to set a boundary for and talking to myself, like, okay, how am I going to do this? Right. And getting comfortable with hearing myself saying, I'm setting a boundary because of this. And I had to be comfortable with that because it wasn't always comfortable. It felt really icky, especially when people tried to push me to get out of it and just conform because my body naturally wanted to go back to what it knew. It wanted to go back to knowing, like, okay, they can cross it. It's okay. Like, I'll just stay quiet, but then I'll process my feelings later on. And that's not healthy either. So allow yourself to just practice. If you need people around you that you can just like practice the script with, that's important. So again, for me, that
mm.
was therapy and my coach at the time. That really helped me just like get into the moment of the script and just like getting comfortable with hearing myself say it. That
I think I love everything I'm hearing, and it's like I'm like here taking notes because I'm like that's sparking this thought, that's sparking another thought. I think also for me, it's getting curious. I am just a curious person by nature, so how do I land on therapy? Oh, by looking for a therapist who lines up with me, what's important to me. The whole time I'm like, when was the last, not last time, but when was an important turning point for me to stand up for my boundaries? And I can't help but think about my health journey. And when I was diagnosed with PCOS, the first thing they always offer is birth control. And I was always against it. So, but that's a personal me. That's a boundary I've set up for myself because I know I'm just not a person that puts that into I didn't want to put something that didn't belong into my body, right? But that's a personal boundary of mine. So now, how do I share that? How do I tell my doctor I don't want what you just gave me? And so respectfully, like it goes back to like also Edie's was saying before, meeting someone also in the middle because as much as I have that boundary for myself, now how do I still work with my doctor and not dismiss her so that we're still in alignment with the end goal of getting better, right? Except I'm not with what you're giving me and I'm with my own like terms, right? So it was more of also like, how do I communicate that? So I said respectfully, no, thank you. What is an alternative that you can give me? Did I know what the alternative was? No. Did I know what other boundary I wanted to set up? No. But that comes with time, going back to what Tatiana said, like it's gonna be constantly like evolving. You're not gonna know it off the bat. It's but at that moment, it was a boundary that I semi knew, but also I wanted to explore because something in me just didn't feel right. Something told me there should be an alternative, right? So I went with that intuition. And even then, the alternative wasn't what I'm using right now, because the alternative she gave me along with my physical doctor was um keto diet and weight training. I do the weight training. The weight training definitely helps. But keto, I don't do that because I need my Mexican food, right? But at the end of the day, it took trial and error. The same way I've had different therapists. So again, it goes back to like getting curious. Like if one thing isn't gonna work, try a different way. If you know that that was the route you wanted to go, but something still feels off, try something else, change things up. But at the end of the day, remain in that curiosity point of what makes you feel at peace, what makes you feel good. And at that moment for me was that's not me. So how can you help me? And not being afraid to ask for that help too, because that's important. That's what's also going to help you get through the curiosity point, because you're not going to have all the answers, right? So who else can help me get to these answers? And if that means one of us, if that means a different therapist, if that means another doctor, if that means a friend who's really good at whatever you're looking for, totally do that. But again, just reminding everyone that that curiosity is so important. Don't hold yourself back. If you feel like something's off or it's just not for you, don't be afraid to take that
I
alternative.
have two thoughts on that. So the first part of that is I think so often people shame themselves when they don't set a
Mhm.
boundary. And I love the curiosity piece because it's all information, right? So, like, let's say you didn't set a boundary at first, and then you thought about it and you're like, you know what? I actually wanted to speak up and I didn't. Now
Mm.
we have information. Now, the next time
Yeah.
something like that comes up, now we can set the boundary. Now we can prepare ourselves. Okay, I remember when I wanted to speak up and I didn't, and it really rubbed me the wrong way. Now, how am I going to handle it for next time? What can I say? How can I support myself, my body, so that I can actually speak up if something like that were to come up again? And then the
Mm-hmm.
second piece to that is, I actually give my clients permission to like not set the boundary exactly the way that they want it the first time. Like it's okay. Like sometimes
Yeah.
when you start setting boundaries, they're going to be a little bit more rigid. You might be a little bit more aggressive. It's a learning opportunity. Now, like, are we yelling at people? Let's not yell at people. Are we swearing at people? Let's not swear. Like, not that kind of aggressive, but sometimes we feel like, oh, did I come off a little bit rude? And
Mm-hmm.
again, it's all a learning opportunity. So you can take that and be like, okay, maybe I was too rigid, or maybe I was like, I didn't say it exactly the way that I wanted to, but
Yeah.
now we can practice, right? We can take that, and the next time we're going to be firm, but not as aggressive. And I also have like this other thought of like most people who think that they're being aggressive are probably not aggressive. And that's just my experience with working with so many people who really think that they're like, "Oh, I'm being mean." No, I guarantee you you're probably not being mean because people who are mean aren't thinking that they're mean. So those are just my two cents. But give yourself permission to not be perfect when you set the boundary. Like, it's okay if it doesn't come off exactly the way that you want it to. Again, it's going to take time. So just be gentle, be curious, like Lupe said, and try your best to kind of move forward. Moving forward, we're going to do things differently.
Yeah.
I feel like this topic could go on like for
Yeah.
hours, right? Like I feel like there's so many things that we can say about this, and maybe we'll have another like part two on this, but I think for now we can kind of leave it here.
Yes. And remember, ladies, use this time to just audit. Where do you
Mhm.
need to set a boundary? Stay curious, understand your values and your why, and just stay committed and consistent to it. That is what's going to help you no matter where it is in your life that you need to set a boundary with. And it's just about communicating at the end of the day. Just be
Mhm.
consistent with the communication. Be graceful with yourself. Allow yourself to learn from all of the experiences with setting a boundary. And over time, it'll get easier.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to speak up.
Hmm.
I think in our community, that's really hard to do,
Hmm.
especially nowadays, and especially as a woman. So I think that just remembering that we do have the capacity to, that we do have the ability to, and that it's okay to speak up and protect yourself and defend yourself wherever it's needed.
Hmm. Definitely. So we
Yeah.
hope you found this very helpful, ladies. Again, we are here for you all. Um, and we just hope that whatever it is that you received in this moment, apply it to your life. And remember, that's how we stay transforming in this journey of ours.
And if you need more support with boundaries or anything that we touched on today, feel free to reach out to Lupe, Iris, or myself.
Got this, ladies. You can do it. And remember, stay lit.
Thank you for joining us today on Lit Podcast. We hope this conversation has ignited a spark within you so that you keep embracing your journey.
Remember, transformation takes time, but every step brings you closer to the life you're meant to live. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, and leave a review.
Let's continue this journey together. Until next time, stay lit and keep transforming.